Karen worked in the Import-Export Bank in the United States from 1980 to 1985 and in the legal department of the World Bank as a legal counsel from 1986 to 2007. She's a Yale Law School graduate. In 1999, Karen reported on the corrupt takeover of the Philippines National Bank, earning herself a reprimand and eventually the sack. She's been exposed to integrity and due process failures of major institutions such as the US General Accountability Office, or GAO, in examining her claims against the World Bank. Karen went on to establish a number of oversight committees under the auspices of the American Bar Association and the US branch of the International Law Association. She's teamed up with other whistleblowers to compare notes on such issues as insider trading and inaccurate financial reporting. Because of her wide-ranging contacts, Karen has much to divulge about what's going on behind the scenes with elite factions, hidden power structures, and global puppet masters. Today she'll be spilling the beans on what she's learned on the global currency wars, the real power behind the Vatican, what's happened to those missing stashes of gold, is there a secret parallel humanoid race, and the agenda to control or enslave humanity or not. Her intention is to expose the corruption which dominates our world and to make sure that we wise up to it. Please give her a big, warm Nexus Conference welcome, Karen Hooties.
Thank you very much, Duncan. I can't tell you how happy I am to be here. There have been so many years that as a whistleblower, you try to find your audience and you're chasing them. And here you are. So it's a real celebration and it's a privilege. And I have to tell you that I've been on a very steep learning curve, but it's gotten very steep today too, Duncan. Thank you so much for this Nexus conference. I just wanted to start out, first of all, by saying that you see my website URL. There's a contact page, and if you have any questions, please ask them, and I deal in documentation. If there's something that I say and I can't back it up, and it turns out that it's wrong, I'll retract it, because my intention is to get to the bottom of whatever it is that's keeping us in the wrong place at the wrong time. And I can tell you, one of the criticisms that I take the deepest to heart is that I'm leading people into a false sense of security, that humanity is about to be wiped off the face of the earth, and I'm telling everybody that it's exactly the opposite. We're about to come into our inheritance. But it's not going to be automatic. I'm holding all of you in this audience accountable for getting your government to get you your gold. So let's go to the first slide. That's your gold. It's 1,750,000 metric tons. Where is it? First of all, it's in a special trust account that was set up by Ferdinand Marcos. He was doing this as a young lawyer for Jose Rizal, who had been in the Vatican for many years. Jose Rizal was the son of Prince Talano, who was a twin of Queen Victoria. And the royals have kept the world's gold for themselves, and then it was stolen from them by the banks. And what happened is Prince Jose Rizal didn't like what he saw at the Vatican, and so he came back to the Philippines with the Vatican's gold. The Vatican sent the gold to the Philippines for safekeeping, and what Jose Rizal did was he locked that gold up in a trust account for 50 years. And the thing about a trust account for 50 years is if you say you own something and you haven't managed to get control of it, after 50 years, you've lost it under something called the statute of limitations. So that gold went into hiding for 50 years, and those 50 years ended in 2005. But we didn't manage to get our gold out. And the reason why is because the banks refused. The man who's the authorized signature authority, and you'll see a little clip of him, that's Wolfgang Struck. He kept writing to the banks and saying, I have the right to withdraw the money. I have the right to find out how much money it is now because it's been accruing interest. And the banks wouldn't give him the time of day. And when I started flailing around, which is what I actually did for a number of years after I was fired by the World Bank, he found me. He said, the two of us can get the job done, and that's exactly what we're doing. And who are we teaming up with? We're teaming up with all the countries of the world, the BRICS countries. And one of the people that's helping us is Putin. I've been on Russia television today 3 times. Yeah? So you're starting to get the picture, right? And, Germany just announced that it was going to the BRICS. You know the day that they announced that? That was the day that I wrote a press release for a 24-hour embargo. And during that 24-hour period, that is when Germany said that they were going to join the BRICS. So what you actually have is you have all of the countries of the world that are all on the same page. And the reason I went to Japan is because there's something called the Status of Forces Agreement. The United States military is actually occupying Japan, and there's a committee that is supposed to take charge if there's going to be an emergency. And I wrote a press release to that joint committee, and I said that joint committee is getting its gold. And that meant that the U.S. military was able to do an end run around the Vatican's shills that are sitting at the top of the Defense Department. So the chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Martin Dempsey, he was there to be a traitor and to make sure that the United States dollar crashed. Now, it's not actually the United States dollar, it's the Federal Reserve note. There's quite a distinction. And Dempsey had a town hall meeting in December, the 2nd of December, and I asked him, I said, if your job is to keep the United States defended, why would you allow the Federal Reserve note to crash? He didn't answer that question. So I asked him the same question in March, but then I said, and besides which, you didn't answer my question back in December. Well, he didn't bother to answer the question, but it was pretty clear that he's there to make sure that the military in the United States was going to end up unilaterally surrendering when the Federal Reserve note crashed. Were they happy about this? Absolutely not. And there was another thing that they were absolutely apoplectic about. That was when there was supposed to be a nuclear bomb dropped on Charleston. Yes, that was on the 7th of October. Instead, what happened was the bomb was detonated 600 miles off the coast. And our friend Putin, he intercepted the military cables showing that that bomb went off. There's seismograph records, there's eyewitness accounts of how the Air Force convey of this nuclear device landed in the base in Charleston. And the 2 heroes that detonated that device in the ocean, as opposed to on the citizens of Charleston, they were fired for their efforts. Yeah, and the Inspector General of the Department of Defense, I wrote him 2 weeks after those illegal firings. And I said, you know that those firings were illegal, that the grounds were absolutely not supported for their discharge. And besides which, you said that you were firing them for something that happened 6 months ago, as opposed to what happened when the bomb was detonated off the coast of Charleston. You better reinstate those heroes. That's John T. Reimer. Well, he didn't. So if you've got the Inspector General who's going to allow you to be fired for no cause, and if you've got the chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff who's going to fire you, what do you do if you're the military? What they did was they wrote books and they sent them to me. So what I'm trying to say is that the military is now able to do an end run because they're part of this joint committee in Japan that's defending Japan, because there's nothing that's going to harm Japan more than their paper currency crashing. So that's what's happened. We now have a way of getting around the shills that were supposed to unilaterally disarm the United States. So the United States is going to join the BRICS. And after I did that press release, I then sent another embargoed press release to the County Executives of America. Ike Leggett, who's the county executive for Montgomery County, that's the county that I live in, and he was the president. And I have been writing him any number of times this year. And so I sent him this press release, and it said that the County Executives of America do not want the Federal Reserve note to crash and disarm the United States. So the County Executives of America agree that the United States is going to accept this gold that you see up there. That gold is what John F. Kennedy was using when he was going to print Treasury dollars. And 10 days later, he was murdered. So we are going to do what John F. Kennedy was planning on doing. And you want to hear something really sweet? Carolyn Kennedy is the ambassador of the United States in Tokyo. So that's where we are. But it's not going to happen automatically. Everybody has got to be informed. And they're certainly not going to be informed by the newspapers or the television stations. Nobody on the television station is hearing about me. Nobody who reads their newspapers is hearing about me. And 2/3 of the alternative media is there to try to discredit me. Because they, for example, Reddit, Adam Schwartz is the one who started Reddit. Condé Nast bought up Reddit after Adam was suicided. And what did Reddit do in reporting some of the issues I'm reporting on? They had one article which was very confusing. When I went in there to try to correct the confusion, I was embargoed. So the alternative media is not going to give you the automatic news either. You've got to be discerning. And I'm sure if you're here in this conference, you probably are discerning. So it's been a wonderful welcome. It's a great privilege to be here with you. So let's see if I can do my PowerPoint. I stayed up. After I saw some of the really good presentations, I realized I had to do better than, than what I was originally starting out. The reason I have this picture of the switchboard operator, that's actually what my function is. I'm a lawyer, I'm an economist, but more than anything else, I'm a switchboard operator. And I'm sitting right in the heart of the international financial system. That's what the World Bank and the IMF are. And a lot of people are very angry at those institutions because those institutions were taken over by the banking cartel, and they were hijacked. But the actual documents about the articles and the rules for that organization, it's actually intact, and that's how we are taking back our wealth. The World Bank and the IMF were set up in 1944 by none other than Jose Rizal, the guy who had Ferdinand Marcos put that gold in trust. Because what Jose Rizal had in mind was that we, in the citizens of the world, were going to need an institution to reclaim our wealth, to reclaim our gold. And that was what he set up there. And what happened was 6 months after the World Bank was set up, there was a rule that said, and by the way, there's 2 layers of oversight. You've got a resident board, which consists of the countries, and it's not one country, one vote. Right now there's 25 executive directors. In the beginning there were 12, and the 8 countries with the largest economies get their own dedicated executive director, and then the rest are grouped into constituencies, and they reside there. What happened 6 months after the World Bank was set up was they had a secret rule, a memorandum that said the board was only going to vote up or down what the president proposed. And the president, of course, is the lackey of the banking cartel. So that's how they hijacked the World Bank. But the lawyer who had been there when they negotiated the Articles of Agreement, Aaron Brockus, the longest-serving general counsel, I got to know him before I joined the World Bank, but I knew that I wanted to go there. And one of the things about me is I'm incredibly persistent. I'm off the charts persistent. And so if I decided I was going to go to work at the World Bank, I was going to go and work at the World Bank. And that's what I did. And so I learned from Aaron Brockus about what the function of the General Counsel was in the World Bank. They're supposed to sit there between the presidency and the board and mediate. They're there for rule of law in the international financial system. And he told me when Robert McNamara came to the World Bank as the World Bank's president, that's when the place started really going bad. So I knew when Paul Wolfowitz came to the World Bank that we were in for some heavy sledding. But I had been by that time I had been at the World Bank for 10 years. The man who brought me into the World Bank, Ibrahim Shihada, he was the general counsel of OPEC. And I guess he must have understood that I was not, the World Bank is, it's got all the countries of the world, and it's a big bureaucracy. But I have been teaming up with the whistleblowers inside the World Bank. So there's the way it works at the World Bank, you have 5% of the people there, they were actually hired by mistake, because they try to find people who are going to go with the flow and just be there for their bureaucracy. But every now and then, there'll be people who are there for the actual mission of the organization. And I think Ibrahim Shihada thought that I was going to be doing that. And that's exactly why he brought me in there, and that's exactly what I've been doing. And it's been a great privilege. But so I've been teaming up with the other whistleblowers at the World Bank, and it is a dream team. I would be sitting at home, and one of them would call me up and say, Karen, there's a hearing in Congress. I would jump in the car, I would go there. And so, for example, Timothy Geithner was at one of those hearings. One of the things that happened in the U.S. Congress was some of them would actually do their job. Yeah, Senator Richard Lugar was one of the ones who did their job. When I reported to Senator Lugar, that there was all this corruption inside the World Bank, Senator Lugar wrote 3 letters to the World Bank saying, don't fire this lady. They fired me anyway. But by the way, one of the Senate Committee on Foreign Relations, it was chaired by Joe Biden. It had 2 junior senators on there, Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama. And I have been, if you want to find out what's been going on, you can just go on my website and you can see the letters that I've been writing to these people. I have been nagging them. I have been tagging them. I have been, they are absolutely, there's nowhere for them to hide. And that's where we are now. And Putin knows this, and he knows that this has been documented in front of the American citizens, and he knows that the BRICS countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, together with the citizens of the United States who do not want their country to be corrupt and a laughing stock among the rest of the world, that we're rolling up our sleeves, and that's the good news, but it's also the bad news, because the minute we take over, we're just like the Titanic that's steering away from the iceberg. All of a sudden, whatever happens, it's going to be on our beat. We're going to have to try to figure out how to transition. We're going to have to try to figure out how to undo centuries and millennia of slavery. There were 2 comments that I wanted to take issue with. One of the comments was from Greg Fredericks, where he said that humanity was degraded from what it used to be. If we were so degraded, we wouldn't be where we are right now. We're ready to take over. And whoever those ETs are, we're going to kick their butts. One of the things about me is that I'm not only off the charts persistent, but I am very aggressive. My father found this out when I was 4. He was ignoring me. I hit him with everything I had in the balls. I did. And he was a fabulous, fabulous father. And, you know, he was sort of stunned. But after that, he didn't ignore me. So, I mean, we are going to kick butt. Whoever thinks that they're going to control humanity has got another thought coming to them. But this is not going to be easy. If we're in charge, how are we going to sort things through? It's a very serious, difficult task that we're facing. So it's good news and bad news. Well, let me hustle on with our PowerPoint. Okay. This is to show you where we are now. Toto the dog, that's the World Bank whistleblowers. This fellow, that's the banking cartel. That's the Bank for International Settlements, which thinks that we need to work 3 months out of the year for them. That's our tax money, which is going directly to the banking cartel. It's not going for roads or bridges or education or anything. And that is just a scam. This business about interest on country currency, that's their idea. That's not our idea. And that system is going down. It's going down as quickly as we can tell our governments to sign the agreement that I wrote to all of the governments. What did I do in Tokyo? I wrote a letter. It said, "Dear government, all of your paper dollars are not worth the paper they're written on. And they are going to be exchanged for gold currency, which is coming out of the gold that you saw that belongs to humanity. And we have to have a transition period because there's going to be a mint that has to mint this currency. So we're going to have to figure out how to have this transition. But the governments are not responding to the letters. A couple of them did. Now, in the Parliament, the UK Parliament, one of the members of Parliament, by the way, I got a couple of statements up in the UK Parliament together with a World Bank whistleblower named Elaine Colville. And I'm going to tell you that there's a power transition model. Actually, let's move to the next slide and you can see. Or no, that's not the next slide. This slide is telling you actually where we are. Some people like to say that I'm sort of making things up about being the acting general counsel of the World Bank, which is what I am. I'm not inside the World Bank because there's a company, Allied Barton, which provides the security personnel. And that company is owned by the banking cartel. So I can't get into the building. But we fired that group and we hired a different group. And that different group is going to just take over. We're retiring the banking cartel. And the way we're doing it, all of this is done through the rule of law. Because that trust account that I was telling you about, there are certificates, gold certificates. The banks issued the gold certificates to gather up some of the gold in the 30s. And those certificates carry interest payable in gold. And that interest has been compounding. So the banks owe us in the quadrillions. And they are insolvent and they're going to be declared bankrupt. That's the way, that's the law. However, the governments are not going to rush and do this because as far as they're concerned, that banking cartel is all-powerful. And so they're not going to stick their necks out. So you, citizens, have got to ask them why they are not declaring that banking cartel bankrupt. Why are you paying your tax dollars out of the country to that banking cartel? And be very, very persistent about those questions. I just read from Julian Assange that there's a lawsuit that the court is refusing to tell anybody about. They say it's not in the national security interest. you just can't let them get away with that. You have to tell them that they have to tell you what's going on. You have to tell them that they have to accept your gold. You have to tell them that you're not going to pay tax dollars to a banking cartel that has no right to be charging you interest on your currency, that you just won't stand for that anymore. Now, anyway, this slide that you're looking at was an email that I sent to my senator, Senator Barbara Mikulski. I have been sending her a lot of questions. And this particular question, if you want to see what was attached to it, you just have to go to Twitter, @KarenHudes. And you can see what was attached to that. There was a fellow who was telling me that if I didn't sit in front of the screens of the banks, that they were going to sue me. So I just sent his threat to my senator, who happens to be the chair of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. And I said, does this guy work for the intelligence community? Because I don't think he's doing the right thing. My job, I didn't know this at the time, but I found this out a little bit later. My job is to certify who is the signature authority for the trust account for the world's gold. And this guy that was threatening me wanted me to certify that a crook was allowed. You know, when you go into a bank and you've got a safe deposit box and one person turns the key and the bank turns the other key. I'm the person that certifies that the one who's turning the key is the real one to turn the key. That's a sweet place to be. And that's where I'm at. Okay, this is, I don't know if you can see the fine print, so I'll just read this out. This is what I said to Senator Mikulski. I'm resending with the correct attachment. That's because whenever I send out emails, I have to go back and reread them because the attachments aren't included, the text isn't included. They're hacking all over the place. But on the other hand, what I find on my computer is sometimes people are giving me documents that I forgot that they existed, but they're actually quite useful. I find that I'm, in the picture of me sitting at the switchboard, all of the intelligence agencies of the world, the good ones, are feeding me information that's useful. And then some of the bad ones are hacking into my email, so I just have to monitor them. Anyway, please acknowledge receipt and that the link functioned correctly to provide correspondence with Captain O'Leary. Captain O'Leary, he is the defense attaché in Tokyo. He's in the U.S. Embassy. And when I sent him an email telling him, because he's working with that joint committee, telling him that the joint committee had to take back the gold for Japan, what happened the next day was that he acknowledged when I spoke to him, and he wrote at the bottom of his email that it was unclassified, meaning that I could send it out wherever I wanted to send it. This told me that the U.S. military doesn't like the idea of being unilaterally disarmed by the Federal Reserve note crashing. So we're actually in quite a sweet situation. We've got our military back. And we've got to make sure that they're really on our side, because there's some capabilities that you don't want them not to be on your side with those capabilities. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Now, I'm just going to tell you who I'm copying to when I issued the press release saying that Japan was accepting its gold. I copied Wolfgang Struck. He's the authorized signatory. I copied all of the World Bank executive directors. That means that that's all the countries of the world. That's a cooperative. So we can take back the rule of law. We can take back justice on this planet to the best of our abilities. That's what we have going now. Okay, there was a fellow in one of the Nordic countries in Parliament. He's not really, I thought he was going to help, but it turns out it's a little too much for him. So he said, please take me off your distribution list. Then I had that Japan Joint Committee that I was telling you about. Then the International Organization of Supreme Audit Institutions, the government auditing agency for the United States and all the other government auditors. So they've been watching, they've been seeing, they know that the international financial system is terribly rigged, and they've just sort of been sitting there like lumps on a log. And now everybody knows that they've got to clean up their act. So I copied them. Also the International Organization of Securities Commissions. Yeah, it's like a big sting operation. See, it's kind of like I was riding in an elevator up the various levels. I started out at the ground floor knowing that there were going to be problems because Aaron Brock has told me that the place had just really deteriorated after what happened with the Vietnam War and McNamara. McNamara was in there for 10 years. That's enough time to really wreck an organization. So I knew that it was going to be tough, but I had no idea that the corruption was that deep. But I also knew, and I'll show you the slide later, there's something called a power transition model. A political scientist went to the Department of Defense, and he modeled using game theory modeling how coalitions would form. And this model is 90 to 95% accurate. That model said, once I got my statement up on the UK Parliament website together with Elaine Colville, it said that the chance that there was going to be rule of law, that there would be coalitions forming, that chance was 90 to 95%. So it was kind of like being on a bucking bronco. If you can stay on, you'll be fine. So I knew that. I just didn't know how deep the corruption was. And I still don't know. We still don't know. But I do know that enough countries are part of this coalition that we are taking back our rule of law. We're taking back our currency. We're taking back our wealth. That gold belongs to humanity, and it's not going anywhere but to humanity. That's where we are. It's not a bad place to be, actually. Yeah. I'm just reading, by the way, when I issued this press release in embargo, that was the day that Germany announced that they were going to be going to the BRICS. I had also copied the ambassador of Germany to the United States. And I actually had an interview with a magazine that has 1.5 million business readers per month. And at the end of the interview, I said, is there something I left out? This was back in September. And they said, yes. Could you speak to the fact that a military helicopter buzzed the Frankfurt consulate, broke all the Chinaware in the U.S. consulate? Could you explain what that was? So, I Googled it and found out that there was a government official who didn't want to be named that said that they were trying to get the attention of the United States. So when I called up the defense attaché in Tokyo, I said, I'm here because I don't think it would be so great for the United States if Germany pulled out of NATO. And I know what to do to make sure that they stay our ally. And that's what all we have to do is kick out the Federal Reserve. And who wants them anyway? Right? So that's what's happening. All right, so let's go on the next one. This is you can see, this is what I received back from the acting defense attaché in the embassy. This email is unclassified. So the next day when I saw that it had stayed in my inbox, because some of these sensitive emails, they'll land and then they'll disappear. But when I saw that email was still there, I knew. But the thing about this power transition model, it's 90 to 95% accurate. What I've done in this next slide is this is the threat from the CIA goon. it goes on actually a little bit longer, but this gives you, the thread. He's asking me to apologize to somebody called the doctor. And I put this up on Twitter, and then I found out that that doctor had been sued by Malaysia for fraud. So he wants me to put some fraudulent goon in front of the world's gold so that they can steal the gold. And they think I'm going to do that. I'm not going to do that. Okay, now this is just one of the certificates. This is how we're going to put the banking cartel in bankruptcy. I don't think you can see the year 1934. Maybe you can. It's the next to the last line. This 17th day of August, 1934. So that's been accruing interest. That's ours. That's on our behalf. Now let me show you how I'm still standing before you. The fellow with the tie, that's Jacek Kugler. He's the political scientist who came to the World Bank with the power transition model that told me that we were going to have coalitions to form so that we could have rule of law. And at that point in time, this was back in 2004 that I ran that model. I didn't realize that Jacek had run the same model, but using the world. I was just using the World Bank. The heavens are applauding. Yeah. And the fellow on the right, that's Larry Garrison. He's my life insurance policy. He is a PR guy, and about 6 years ago, I read an article in the Atlantic Monthly about him, and I thought, gee, I really needed, because I was trying very hard ever since I was fired in 2007 to tell my story, and I wasn't getting anywhere. And I realized I needed a PR guy. And so Larry took me on, and then maybe 6 months after he was my PR guy, he started making noises like he didn't want to be my PR guy anymore. So I said, Larry, I don't want to talk on the phone about this issue. Let me fly out and see you. So I flew out to California, and that's when I found out that some goon, had attacked Larry. But Larry's a pretty feisty guy, and that guy ended up, leaving Larry, limping. But anyway, so Larry said, okay, I'll stay with you. And I said, I'm not rich, although I'm certifying the world's wealth, but I'm not rich. But I said, I'm going to write a story, and it's probably going to be a bestseller, and I'll give you half the royalties. So we have that agreement. That's our understanding. Okay, now you're going to meet Wolfgang Struck.
I would like to introduce you, Wolfgang, to everybody. This is Wolfgang Struck, and we are going to do this brief video because I think it's about time everybody met the eminent Wolfgang Struck, who, yes,
oh my God.
eminent.
Yes. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I'll just give a very brief introduction how we got in touch with each other. And I thought maybe if I just read the email that I got from you, which was dated May 8th, 2013. Dear Karen Udis, a friend spoon-fed me with the World Bank whistleblower. This is very interesting indeed, even if, to be honest with you, some of the things were a little technical. I do see a person in front of me who has prior insight. And this is the important part. I'm in a position to legally claim ownership to the unlawfully sequestered shares of stock of the late Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos, and you know what follows. It ends with the umbrella code 0102274OA. this looks to me like a best matchup. Let's do something great together.
Okay, okay.
So I hand it over to you, Wolfgang.
And to say what? Yes,
What,
I have been on this, let's say, latest from 2002, when I came into a position of being the authorized representative for the court-appointed owner of the Philippines. At that time, I thought that he was the owner of the Philippines. I got corrected later on. This is Prince Julian Morden-Tallano, who was convinced by friends of mine that maybe Wolfgang, as a German lawyer and a former banker with UBS, could bring something moving. And I had a very big problem together with the presiding judge in the Tallano case. He said, Wolfgang, you have good ideas, but where is it? Where is the goal? Where are the accounts? And I did not know. Until I found in 2009, more or less by chance, by accident, I found someone his name is Floro Garcia. And I had no idea that that would be the key to the whole thing. I have no idea. I met a person, no read, no write. He had, I don't know what, he had two old or very old advisors, all of this. And I said, oh my God, what is all of this? But with my little advantage that I have, I come from UBS practically. I know what Marcos was about, more or less. I did for some time, I did some trading for UBS in my own office in number 2 Broadway in Manhattan, New York. When they told me at night what to do, I had a huge advantage. So I got married to a Filipina, come to the Philippines, and then I fall into this trap that everybody is trapping in, that everything is now a lie about Marcos. And they claim that Marcos was a dictator, that Marcos had stolen money from the Filipino people, and nobody dares to speak out. I was with a lawyer who is claimed to be a Marcos lawyer, Oliver Lozano, and I learned a lot from him. I learned a lot. I learned a lot also from other people. This is so complex, nobody can understand. I can only say one thing. My sons asked me, Papa, what are you doing in the Philippines? And I said, I better don't tell you because you will think that your father is crazy. I'm not. I'm just a boy from Kiel in northern Germany, and I had 16 years, very nice years in Düsseldorf in Germany, when I was officially appointed to be the broker in the Düsseldorf Stock Exchange for currency in the office of Heinz Bierbaum.
Okay, that's Wolfgang. So together, Wolfgang and I have made an offer to each and every country to get their gold, and the idea is that the paper currency vanishes. It gets exchanged, actually. It doesn't just vanish. It gets exchanged. But the advantage to giving the world's gold back to the world's people through their currency is it's a number of advantages. One is that you're not going to have layers of government bureaucracy. All you have to do is certify to the mint, make sure that the gold that goes to the mint comes out of the mint. You need to know what the schedule is. And the people who are going to get their gold, they have to know when it's going to be delivered to them. They turn the currencies, the paper currency in, and they get the gold. Now, it may take a while for the mint to mint these currencies. By the way, if you want paper currency or bills, there's a good technology called Aurum, where you take the gold and you make it very, very thin, and you encase it with two plastic, like an envelope. And that handles just like paper currency, but it's actual gold. And that means that you don't have to pay interest on your debt. And but the other currency that you're going to have is you're going to have local currency. All of the local areas are going to be able to have their own local currency. And that means that all of the businesses and the people who provide local services will be able, it's kind of like a barter system. There's an economist named Silvio Giselle, and he has an idea that when you have those local currencies, you punish people for holding it too long. If you have it for more than a month, it loses its value. That means that the currency will circulate quickly. And what that does is it brings you full employment all over the place. There's not going to be a single unemployed person who wants to work. That's going to happen overnight, just in the most wonderful way. People are going to have fresh food, the local handicrafts, everything's going to flourish. And the way you do this is you take away something called legal tender laws. Those laws are there just to control people. If a person wants to accept currency and a person wants to give currency, that's all that you're going to need to know. And if a country doesn't want to have gold currency, and we're not talking about one world currency, each of the separate countries will be able to put their own picture on the gold, and it's their currency. They all say what the denominations are. And when an economy grows, there'll be more local currency and there'll be more gold to be given to them for that currency. Or if a country says, we don't actually want your gold, we have a lot of bananas, we're going to use our bananas as commodities to back the currency, that's fine too. So the idea is not to have control. The idea is to allow people's currency to be there just as a convenience for exchange. And I know that Michael Tellinger was saying that money is the root of all evil and we don't want money. There's nothing to prevent any country or any community from having their own system. The idea is not that we have to impose anything on anybody. But the main point is that we do have to get rid of these paper currencies very, very quickly because we are on the edge of something called permanent gold backwardation. That means that you go back into the dark ages. That was what the banksters had in mind. They were planning on starving us with no food in the grocery stores. They were planning on having mass dislocation because our paper currency was going to crash. So we have got to engineer our transition from the banksters' currency to treasury currency. And that's not an easy thing to do. So I'm not here to say the world is all better. The chances that we manage to get our act together and get this done is 90 to 95% because we have coalitions, including Putin, including in the United States, the governments at the county level. But it's not going to happen automatically. People who understand what I'm telling you, you've got to be very active and get enough people to understand that we've got to make sure that this transition happens. So to give an analogy, think of the Titanic. We're in the engine room, we've turned the wheels, the iceberg is right ahead of us. We need the power, and the power is going to come from informed people. So that's where we are. We don't have to have like the French Revolution where people have to take back the power on the streets. We've got the rule of law, but we have got to have enough people understand what's going on to make, or if anybody likes to sail, we've come about, but the wind has died down. What we need is people to understand that we have come about and to provide the power to allow the boat to come about. That's where we are. Okay, this is one of my other friends. This is Edmond Rouillet. He's a film producer. He produced a wonderful movie called The Banksters Made Off with America. It couldn't be distributed because the banksters thought they could make off with America. So, and Edmund is actually, he had a group of whistleblowers that I got to know. And those people were giving me some very important information. So I wasn't going to talk about the second species, but there's a Dr. Edmund Spencer. He is a Yale Medical School trained neurologist. He's the one who told me about that. And let me introduce Izumi to you.
Wolfgang wants me to do an edit. To do a taping, and so I added software. I'm recording this now, I think.
Yeah.
I'm trying. Yeah.
Okay.
I'll have to see if it works. Shall I hang up and then I'll just see and then I'll call you right back?
Yeah. Okay. Whatever.
Okay. Yeah. No. I just want to make sure I know how to do it when it's for real. I'll call you right back.
Okay.
So that's Izumi Takahashi. That was when I recorded Wolfgang. I wanted to do a test drive with Izumi. And what happened with my interview with Wolfgang was it cut off in 5 minutes. I don't know, I didn't touch the button. It just cut itself off. But Izumi Takahashi, she's a journalist, a Japanese journalist, who her original job was she was preparing Japanese students for the college entrance exams, which are very serious if you're a Japanese student. And her field is classical Japanese literature. She was so popular that the students were all lining up because she was teaching her students critical thinking. And so she became a television personality. They realized that she had something very special. And so she became a journalist, and she had her own weekly articles. And then people decided that she was maybe too dangerous. She was teaching people how to think for themselves. She was a real journalist. And so she had to leave Japan because she had a terrible health situation. And but anyway, she stayed in Japan to make it possible for me to do my work. So that's Izumi. Okay, let me talk about the power transition model a little bit. It is developed in the Department of Defense, and I spoke to Chuck Hagel about this in 2008 when he was a senator for Nebraska. And at that point, what was going on was I had been fired. I knew that the power transition model was saying that the United States was going to lose something called the Gentleman's Agreement. That existed for 66 years. It meant that the United States could single-handedly pick the president of the World Bank. And I knew that that was going to fall by the boards if the United States did not observe the rule of law in the World Bank. I knew that it wasn't observing the rule of law in the World Bank. In the end of the 1990s, there was a special committee that the board appointed because they could see that the personnel practices were corrupt inside the World Bank. So I was part of a committee. We brought in Alberto Bazan from IBM, and the idea was for Alberto to find which managers needed more training, which managers needed to be promoted, which managers needed to be fired. At the end of that exercise, I said, well, now that we're bringing in Alberto, we also need to have a monitoring mechanism to see whether the reform is taking hold or not. And they said, no, we don't need a monitoring mechanism. And that was one of the reasons why I started to get really concerned. Because some people say, well, Karen, you're just lately on the scene. But the fact of the matter is, as soon as I started seeing how the World Bank was out of compliance, I was doing what you're supposed to do as a lawyer inside an organization, which is to say I was going up the corporate ladder. And it was only when things weren't working at that level that I then went to the next level. And it was only after I exhausted all of the administrative remedies inside the World Bank, I went to the audit committee inside the World Bank, and I'll read a statement of the chair of the audit committee for you. I also went to see Jim Wolfenson, he was the president at that time. And what I was reporting was I had been working on the Philippines, actually. I was the country lawyer for the Philippines. When I first joined the bank, I was the country lawyer for Jordan and Yemen. That was an incredible experience. I was there for 10 years. I started trying to work on water projects in the Middle East to try to get more water to the Palestinians. And that was when I got reassigned to the Philippines. It was kind of hard. You'd try to do something right, and the minute you were doing it right, you got reassigned. But anyway, so I went to the Philippines. And then what happened in the Philippines, this was at the end of the East Asia financial crisis. And there was a large bank in the Philippines which ended up getting sold to a man who owned a borrower in default to the bank, Philippine Airlines. His name was Lucio Tan. And so I went to the man who was in charge of the lending program. He was called the country director. And I said, "You can't sell a bank to a borrower in default. Are you out of your mind?" And I got reassigned. And I didn't accept that. So I went to the meeting where they were saying whether or not they were going to disperse the loan. And I said, "The conditions haven't been met, so you can't disperse the loan." And there was a man who was the vice president in East Asia, and he knew that I was going to go to the board and say that the loan had been dispersed without the conditions being met. So they had to hold up that loan. And then what happened was the people in the Philippines whose money was on deposit in that bank got nervous because the borrower in default owned the bank, and so they withdrew their money. There was a run on the bank, so the government had to bail out the bank for $500 million, and then we held up our loan for $200 million, and the Japanese held up their loan for $200 million. That's $900 million worth of bad loan. And then when the World Bank Evaluation Department evaluated the project, they said that the World Bank could not have anticipated that this terrible thing was going to happen. And so I went to the evaluation department and I said, here's the email that I wrote to the country director. Of course we could have anticipated it because I did anticipate it, and you're lying to the board, and you're doing a cover-up inside the bank. And you can't have a cover-up in a bank. So I just sort of sat there fuming. And then there was the people who were the general counsel at the World Bank kept getting fired by the board. The board was not happy at all this corruption. So there was an executive search firm, and I wrote something that they thought, well, let's interview this lady. And during the interview, they asked me, they said, "Why are the general counsels leaving all the time?" I said, "That's easy, because the place is corrupt, because there's no compliance. And if you're an executive search firm and you're told that there is no compliance, that means that you have got to fill the position with somebody who brings that organization into compliance." So I didn't get the job, right? So that was when I went. I had been going to the Treasury Department. You should see what I wrote to the Treasury Department. And the best part about it was Larry Summers. He was the Secretary of the Treasury. Well, his kid was in the same elementary class as my kid. So as these things were going on, and as, for example, with what was going on with the bad personnel policies, I would chase after him at every PTA meeting. But I have to confess, there was one PTA meeting where I really blew it, which is one of the times that they were filling the general counsel position. A friend of mine said, "Oh, I know somebody who's a candidate. He's really quite good." So I said to Larry Summers, "This guy is quite good." And that was my boss who reassigned me in the Philippines. So I wasn't happy. Here's the guy who, I had said to Larry Summers that he should be hired. And so I went to the man who represented the Dutch government, Peter Steck. And I told Peter Steck what had happened with Ko Yung Tun, and I told him what had happened in the Philippines. And at that point, he had started out being the chair of the audit committee of the board, but later he became the chair of something called the Committee on Development Effectiveness. So then I told him what happened when I tried to correct the evaluation department when they were lying to the board about the Philippines banking sector reform loan. So Peter Steck, the two of us went to see Jim Wolfenson. And, I'll never forget that. Here's this huge desk. It's kind of like in The Wizard of Oz. It really is like The Wizard of Oz. So I'm, at the way end of this huge desk with Peter Steck, and here's Jim Wolfenson, the Wizard of Oz's projector screen is rattling. And so Jim Wolfenson said, yes, I'll take care of it. His way of taking care of it was to tell Ko Yung-tung that I had been up there to complain about him. So, of course, I got fired. But, anyway, I was actually surprised that I was fired because Peter Steck was helping me. Now, let me fast forward. At a certain point, when you look at the cases that I was suing the World Bank, I was suing a bunch of people. I was suing the auditing firm, KPMG, because when KPMG was brought in to audit the World Bank financial statements, they wouldn't let me speak to the audit team. Now, that's a breach of the audit standards. So I sued KPMG. And, of course, I sued the World Bank because I was a bondholder. That meant that they were not immune. I was also suing the insurance company, the medical insurance company. I was suing them because what did they do? They told the World Bank Evaluation Department the name of I went to a marriage counselor. That's kind of water under the bridge. But anyway, they told the World Bank Health Department the name of my marriage counselor, and that health department called up my marriage counselor to tell them that I was nuts. Well, I didn't like that. So I sued the insurance company that's not allowed to tell the World Bank Health Department who my marriage counselor is. Now, Peter Steck, there was also a fitness for duty assessment, and they called up Peter Steck, and they said, Karen said that we should check you out for a reference. So what did Peter Steck say? He said, well, I didn't think that you were trying to declare people incompetent. I thought that happened in other countries. So they hung up on Peter Steck on that. But I knew that there was going to be a problem because one of my friends, a few years earlier, he got somebody angry. I don't know what he did, actually. But the next thing he knew, he was in a taxi cab to an insane asylum, and the doctor who was in charge of that place, he was involuntarily committed, the doctor who was in charge of that place was the same doctor who worked in the World Bank medical department and wouldn't certify him to leave the place. And the guy, didn't really recover that well. It was kind of a bad experience for him. But anyway, so then, let's fast forward a little bit. 6 months ago, Peter Steck called up my husband to say, Karen obviously needs to go see a psychiatrist. She's having some mental problems. I didn't go to see a psychiatrist. All right, let's talk about the power transition model, how accurate it is. The forecasts produced by the model were shown to be both more specific and more accurate than the results generated by the Directorate of Intelligence. And the reason why is because what this model does, and I was the one who gave the information to develop the model for rule of law. You have to say, somebody who knows a situation very well has to say, who are the stakeholders? That means, who are the groups that influence the issue? Where do they stand on the issue? How powerful are they? And how important is that issue to them? So, for example, the president could be one of the stakeholders, but since there are so many issues on the president's desk, you have to try to guess where in the pile of issues on the president's desk that particular issue is. So I modeled rule of law inside the World Bank, and that's where you can see. I was going to try to show you all what my estimate was. I could tell you which of the countries I thought were more in the favor of rule of law. And I guessed wrong on a couple of countries, but that wasn't the important thing. The place where I guessed totally wrong was the media. I was completely bamboozled. I thought that the job of the journalists was to tell people what was going on. I thought they were part of the solution. I didn't Yeah. So you can see I had a pretty steep learning curve. Okay, but let me give you the next slide. You're going to love this one. This is from Jacek Kugler's model. He did the same model in 2004, but he was looking at the countries. I was just looking at internal inside the World Bank, and I didn't know at the time, actually, that Jacek Kugler had done this model. Specifically, a gap between the United States and Germany, the leader of Europe now and into the foreseeable future, generates frictions and dissatisfaction within the Western alliance. This dissatisfaction, in turn, raises the potential of a challenge between the U.S. and an emerging giant in Asia. Contrast this structure with the alternative that was emerging after the war in Afghanistan. A German-led EU was coordinating anti-terrorist efforts, with the US, Russia, France, and Japan, seemed to be participating in an expanded NATO-EU Atlantic alliance. China was now neutral. Given this structure, the potential challenge from a dissatisfied Asian power could be delayed until the end of this century. So where are we? Whenever you hear somebody talking about the Dragon family, just think CIA. Because China is actually ruled by the Knights of Malta. Yeah. So the question is whether we have a currency war and China comes up way fast, or whether we have this alliance, the BRICS alliance, with the United States minus the Federal Reserve. That's our choice. And do you think we love the Federal Reserve so much that we want to keep them? I don't think so. I think we're going to be right on track for rule of law. I don't think we're on track for a currency war in China. And the next slide, this is what Jacek sent to me on my model of rule of law. And this is actually where we are right now. In some, there will be upward movement on this scale. The president, that's actually the president inside the World Bank, that's the banking cartel. The president will cave to political forces, and the overall bank will compromise either at 50 or 70, depending on who can be contacted to press for the desired outcome. So our job is to press for the desired outcome. It's really up to the citizens of the world whether we press for the desired outcome. That's where we are. The power transition model has been predicting with 90 to 95% certainty that coalitions will do in the banking cartel ever since I stated in the UK Parliament House of Commons Public Administration Select Committee's report on complaints. Do they make a difference? On page 186, today's dire circumstances call for immediate and forceful intervention in the hope that time still remains. That's where we are. Elaine Colville reported, it devolves on Parliament to sort out this egregious state of affairs. Now, because of people like Duncan and Nexus, I'm able, and also some of the other alternative media, I'm able to tell people to get in touch with their Parliament and to press for the desired outcome. And as people start doing this, they can also reach out to other people that may not be as informed as you are. And that's also something that's very important, and that is, you're here in a conference, some of you have come with friends, but if any of you are just sort of doing this as an individual, I advise you to get a network around you. It's more fun that way, it's more effective that way, but more importantly, you need the protection of other people. That's why I'm here, because I have not been operating individually. I've been operating in a network of whistleblowers. You have to do that when you're working on this kind of issue in this kind of way. And the other thing is you have got to be, you'll be getting a lot of information from different people. Don't just take something because somebody sounds convincing. You have to do your homework. You have to look to see whether the information is consistent, whether there's documentation for it. And you also have to be prepared to revise what you thought if you later find something out which is inconsistent. But it's like puzzling. You have to see, sometimes you'll put a piece in the wrong place. You have to take it out. You have to be willing to get the puzzle right. And that requires active work. But the thing is, the more you do it, the easier it is, and the more fun it is. It's actually quite interesting to find out what's behind the onion. You're looking at different layers of the onion. You're peeling it back. And I'll be very honest with you. I'll tell you that when we get what I'm calling rule of law in place, from what I've seen, we're not there. There's still another layer inside, at least one. And I can tell you what I suspect is in that layer. That's what people call the paranormal. I can't explain things, why they happen, why they don't happen, but one of the things that I've found really fascinating, and that is that whenever there's been a challenge, first I've had the challenge in my family, acting out in some layer, in some level. And the very first challenge that I had was actually to understand that I didn't understand myself. There are ways that you can find out how you are, and one of the ways is having your family tell you how you are. And my sisters have been telling me how I am for years. So, for example, on my birthday, my younger sister gave me a birthday card. It said, "You're a queen," and then you open it up and it says, "You're a drama queen." Yeah, but so what I had to find out was that when my mother's now 90, but 5 years ago, she really wasn't managing on her own in her house. And I felt that it was not a good time for her to move, that it was going to be too difficult. But my sisters saw absolutely, very clearly, that my mother was lonely and that she might have barely been managing, but it wasn't going to continue. And she really needed to be in an assisted living facility. And it was only later that I realized that I didn't like the idea that it was going to be expensive. And I wasn't admitting it to myself. So here I was telling myself that I was concerned about my mother. I was the dutiful daughter. I was not aware of who I really was. And you have to understand that there are things about yourself that you don't want to admit. And you have to understand that you have to accept people close to you telling you those things that you don't want to admit. And once you realize that dynamic, and that everybody has blind spots about themselves, that's how you can learn what other people's blind spots are. We're all very capable of telling people what their deficiencies are, but we're not so capable of finding our own deficiencies. And that's really the dynamic. You have to be open to finding your own deficiencies, because if you're not going to be able to move through the challenges that we have. We're going to have to learn as a race of human beings how to be in charge of ourselves, because somebody else has been in charge of us. And we're going to have to do that now for ourselves. And unless we see ourselves very clearly for who we are and where we need help, and be admitting where we need help, we're going to get it radically wrong. And, I do think every now and then about what are we going to have to do in the transition. And in the World Bank, where you're doing projects, you're taught that you have to have a good understanding before you go into a project, how to know whether you're succeeding or whether you're failing. They call these monitorable indicators. And so I would say the very first monitorable indicator that you're going to have to keep in front of you to know whether you're succeeding or failing is, what are you doing to your whistleblowers? That's a very important indicator, because they're telling you those things that you need to know that you may not want to know, but you need to know them. Don't punish your whistleblowers. This is from Peter Steck. This is back when he was my buddy. The issue. Karen Hudes of the legal department has a problem, and I think it would be very useful for her to hear a passionate, dispassionate view from an intelligent person who knows the bank. The passion would be for the bank, truth, and fairness. The dispassionateness would come from intelligence and a bit of distance. Karen has bitten into a case of failure of the bank, harm to a country, cover-up, failure of evaluation, failure of controls, and threatening failure of the board audit committee. to take up the issue. The corollary is not hard to envisage. The bank runs the risk of being caught with its pants down in an area where it's lecturing the developing world on how to dress, and the whistleblower, who has not whistled in public, is at imminent risk of being dismissed due to failure of the checks and balances in the bank meant to protect individuals, the Integrity Directorate, the Ombudsman, the Tribunal, the President himself. I hope you'll be willing to talk with her and give her the benefit of your thoughts. In my opinion, somebody in the bank needs to be interested and brave, staff, or a bit brave, board. By far the most elegant way forward would be for the audit committee to discuss the material case from the point of view of whether the accusations against the handling of the case are correct, and if so, whether there could be a systemic aspect to this kind of failure. One thing in my view is certain. If the truth is withheld from the board and the board does not even react when it has indications that this may be the case, the board is negligent in exercising its responsibility and therefore also at risk. An underlying issue is whether a staff member has the duty to inform the board if he or she hits upon a cover-up. Is one's duty towards the bank or towards one's bosses? The parallels with other corporate U.S. administration and European Commission cases is obvious, not to speak of broader and more emotional analogies from recent history. So that's been the beginning of the cover-up, and I'm just simply there to report that the bank is not in compliance. And as long as I say the bank is not in compliance, that means that every single minister of finance, it's their job to fix the problem. And I also went in the United States to the attorneys general in the states. And when that didn't work, I went to the governors. And when that didn't work, that's when I went to the county executives. So each and every government is now on notice that they have to end the cover-up of corruption. And that means that we're on track for rule of law. We can hold them accountable. These are nice pictures of a model that was done at the Federal Institute of Technology. 3 mathematicians looked at the ownership of the companies on the capital markets, and what they found out was that there was one network of corporate control. And this is, at the very center, it's the Bank for International Settlement. They control 40% of the economic value of the corporations. And the way they did this, it's not because they spent 40% of the stock prices. They spent maybe 1%. They have 10% of the economic value that they're entitled to. What they did was they took the same directors and appointed them to interlocking boards. And they thought that we would be too stupid to find out. I'm talking here about Germany because you remember in the power transition model, Germany has a very special pivot role. And so when Germany is now saying that they're joining the BRICS, that means if the United States does not get rid of the Federal Reserve, that the United States is going to end up as, it's not going to have allies. It's going to be, we were talking about the currency. The Federal Reserve note is going to crash because nobody is going to accept it in payment. The BRICS countries are now, that's 25% of world trade. They're now settling among themselves, and at the end of the day, if there's a country that owes more than its offset, it's going to settle that difference in gold. So that means that the United States either gets rid of the Federal Reserve note or it's going to be, there's going to be a currency war, actually. And we don't need a currency war. And we're actually not on track for a currency war. We're on track for the coalition for rule of law. And I went to the Department of Defense when Secretary Hagel was named as the Defense Secretary. I went to the group that managed that model inside the Department of Defense. And I started asking them to give messages to Secretary Hagel, and they said, that's not in our chain of command. You better find a different way. So that's when I started taking 4 different contact routes. I went to the chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I also went to the liaison with the U.S. Congress. There's a website where I could just send something in as a citizen. And there was a fourth, very special route. And that is Peter Verka, the Department of Homeland Security. There's a committee called the Council of Governors. There's 10 governors that are each part of the FEMA region. And I would go to that group, and I've sent them about 40 different letters. And they kept responding. They would say, just this is not worth responding to. But of course, what I do is I then tweet what I've been sending to the Department of Defense. So everybody sees it, whether they want to respond to it or not. And what I've said to that group is I've said, your job is to maintain order. And you can't maintain order if the Federal Reserve note crashes. So you had better replace the Federal Reserve note with this currency. Why wouldn't you accept the gold that's being offered to you? Does that make any sense whatsoever? And they haven't gotten back to me. Now, let me give you a little flavor of my relationship with the board. I speak Dutch because I studied economics in Holland. And the reason I did that is because I was graduating from college during the Vietnam War era. And they said, love it or leave it. I said, I'm out of here. So I went to Holland, and anyway, so I speak Dutch, and I happened to be back in Holland when the man who represented the Dutch government, Herman Wijfels, was complaining because when there's a president of the World Bank, Paul Wolfowitz, who got fired by the board because he gave a 30% pay raise to his girlfriend, Shahariza. And the board didn't like that, and they fired him. And Herman Wijfels was the one whose job it was to organize the board to fire Wolfowitz. So I happened to be in Holland, and this is what Herman Wijfels said in the Dutch newspaper, in Dutch. Herman Wijfels says that his past was delved into in a shocking manner this year. According to the man who formed the current Dutch cabinet, this took place during his work at the World Bank, where he chaired the committee that looked into the controversial dealings of bank president Paul Wolfowitz. Wolfowitz had to step down following Wijfels' inquiry into Wolfowitz's possible conflicts of interest. Wolfowitz had given his girlfriend, who also worked at the bank, a very large raise. According to Wijfels, third parties tried to surface issues from his past which might have discredited him. What does this mean? Do you remember Elliot Spitzer, who went to the New York Madam? Well, some of the board members patronized that same place of business. And they were told if they fired Paul Wolfowitz that this information was going to be made public. But the fact of the matter is those board members, they just went ahead and fired Paul Wolfowitz. But when I found out about this, I went back. Remember, I had been in contact with the Senate Committee on Foreign Relations. This was I think it might have been right after I was fired. So I went back to them, and I said, are you out of your mind when you've got this power transition model that says that the U.S. is going to lose its leadership at the bank, and you're blackmailing ambassadors? This is not a winning strategy. And so what happened was they told me, well, Karen, why don't you take the message for us to the Treasury Department? So I did, and I actually, if you go on my website, you'll see the letters that I wrote. And what I later did was I took this fact and I sent it to all of the UN missions. And I said, you need to get an opinion from the General Assembly whether the World Bank board, if they're getting this kind of treatment, should leave the decision up to the president whether or not to propose things, or whether they need to exercise their powers under the articles. I asked for the General Assembly to do that, and I cited this information. I must have sent, I would say easily 15 emails to all of the UN missions. So when I wrote the letter to the embassies in Tokyo, I said, by the way, I've been writing to you guys forever. Here's what I wrote to the New York missions. Here's what I wrote to the Washington embassies. And I've got that stuff all there. So I'm right in the very heart of the international financial system, and I'm sort of shining a light, just like Toto's, the dog. I've pulled back the curtain so everybody can see that there's nothing but corruption. There's no there there. And to drill it down a little better is, you've got the legal profession and you've got the accounting profession. Now, way, way back when I was inside the World Bank, I had a meeting with the president of the American Bar Association talking about rule of law. We were going to set up a rule of law commission. So I kept going back to the American Bar Association. I kept saying, things aren't working here. Was getting absolutely no response. About a month ago, the American Bar Association Journal, this is read by about 1 million lawyers in the United States, had an article talking about something called sovereign citizens. Now, these are citizens who are angry because, I don't know if you all understand when you have a baby and you get a birth certificate for that baby. They take the birth certificate and they pledge it on the capital market. They figure out how much that baby is going to pay in taxes over their lifetime, and they start earning interest on the income stream. They do this. Anyway, so the sovereign citizens understand that this is going on, but the solution that they have for it isn't, it's not actually working in the courts. But so here's this article, and I started commenting on it. And I started saying, well, they've got a point there, actually. And at a certain point, the American Bar Journal tried to stop me from making comments. Look what I've done. Well, can I just finish one sentence? I told the lawyers and accountants, if they don't get the gold out of the banks, we're not going to have that profession anymore.